recently trying to avoid the term problem gambler, and I guess part of the reason for that is that there is often shame and guilt that's associated with coming forward and talking about gambling. And I think that idea of problem gambler or problem with gambler, it makes it more kind of directly towards the person presenting, the client. However, using that same as I guess, and I think of it in the same way as drugs and alcohol. Now we kind of look at that harm minimization. We're focusing on the harm that it does, making a bit more external, and that's kind of just a bit of the jargon around it, I think. And we can look at the harm, because I think the first thing we always think about with gambling harm is the first thing we think about, obviously, is financial problems. And that could be something that you would see, or it could be something that you wouldn't see with clients. And it just depends. Like for example, maybe if it was a GP, I think a GP would maybe see clients who were asking for samples rather than being able to afford the medication themselves. But then we've also got the other impacts, of course, that gambling have, which relate to relationship difficulties. Of course, it can lead to conflict and relationship breakdown, and even just what I find gamblers really can struggle with is that the dishonesty that they've brought into the relationship, and they really struggle with that in terms of emotional health as well. And then we've got health problems that are caused. So I really see this talking with people that people that are gambling can also be drinking more, smoking more, and related to stress, higher blood pressure and that kind of thing. Definitely. Emotional and psychological distress is another harm. And again, that goes back to what I was mentioning, that shame and regret that can come around gambling. And then the long-term effect of having shame and regret ongoing could lead to depression, anxiety, and at times suicide, like suicidal thoughts or suicide action. Could be also issues around work and study, the gambling hangover. People have heard of that term, causing absenteeism. And at times that absenteeism can lead to job loss as well. Cultural problems, again, are often based around shame and guilt. In my experience, people coming from some other cultures come to Australia, and they've been in a culture where gambling is completely not accepted, and so they still carry the shame around with it. And criminal activity too, so fraud to gain funds, to chase losses can happen, and even domestic violence, kind of the stress in the relationships can kind of trigger that as well. So this slide, we're just trying to give that broad picture of how gambling it can impact a lot of areas of somebody's life and becomes a public health issue as a result of that. So common indicators, I might just go into the harm. So you can see that we've got general harms, crisis, and legacy. So here they're looking at, in terms of general harm, that's the stuff that the harms that occur at the time of gambling. So I guess I was thinking in terms of psychological well-being. If someone's kind of walking out again without having had a win or having a big loss, often they're kind of saying these real negative things to themselves, like, how could I do this to myself? Why do I keep doing this? What's my family going to say? And you can see the impact that will have on psychological well-being over time. And then they've got crisis harms, and that's usually, crisis is kind of the window often when people are seeking support. Like, that could be the relationships broken down to the point where the partners say, I'm going to leave, and so they're like, okay, I need to take action and I'm ready to seek help. And legacy harm, so that's the stuff that's happened over the long term. gambling. So even after the gambling ceased, I've got an example at the moment of someone I was working with that hasn't gambled for 7 months, and yet the relationship wasn't able to kind of recover from that, and they're going through separation. So it really can last a long time, and sometimes those harms are intergenerational. You know, kids that have kind of been in families that have gone through this can be impacted on that for a long time. Yeah, and of course, again, the range. So they've got here, you know, it can range from minor negative experiences all the way up to crisis points. So there's quite a lot to kind of think about, again, as that public health issue. So identifying gambling harm, I might just, sorry. So again, people often suffer for approximately 10 years before they seek treatment for gambling, which is a significant amount of time if you kind of really think about it. Have I turned the slide there, Nick? Oh, you have. Great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So 10 years is a long time, and evidence shows that most gambling harm is actually unrecognised in the primary care setting and therefore goes untreated. And I've got a bit of an example a colleague had of this, where they were working with someone who had a long history of help seeking. So they'd kind of reached out and got support for mental health. They'd reached out and were gaining support for drug and alcohol. And that had been taking place over sort of 10 or 15 years, a long period of time. And the gambling dated 20 years back. And the therapist said, well, I'm just wondering why you have been getting all the support for that, for other areas of your life, but it's taken so long to get help for gambling treatment, for the gambling. And the client said, well, no one ever asked me about gambling, so I didn't know I could get help. And so I guess that, to me, that's just a really good example of the importance of, if we can be asking these questions, then at least we're laying the seed for people to know that the help and the services and support are out there. And the other comment I guess I wanted to make here too is around how important it is for me as the person doing the therapy, how important it can be in terms of how soon or compared to how later they attend treatment. Early identification often means lower levels of loss, and the cognitions, the ability to change or shift the cognitions around gambling happens more readily with those people than it does with people who have been gambling for longer periods of time and have lost more money, everything really. So yeah, that's where I think it becomes important to be screening for this. And you can see on the slide easily here yourself. So patients may present with the following clinical features of harm. And I guess you can see this is not necessarily indicating this must be gambling. It could mean a number of things, but putting gambling in the back of your mind along with other things that these symptoms show could be really helpful. So, for example, signs of stress, depression, anxiety can be related to gambling, disturbed sleep. So people have lost so much money, or they're ruminating, how am I going to get money, or how am I going to tell my partner? Changed eating patterns, again, due to stress. Alcohol and nicotine dependence. Again, I've seen that just going together, the three things. Unexplained loss of time or money. That's a pretty good gambling indicator. And dissatisfaction with the quality of their life. I don't know, Nick, do we want to open up for kind of comments here, or shall we leave it to the end of this section? Or
maybe turning to this section, because I think obviously we're going to talk about the role of community workers as well. And I think it's probably a broader question to everyone out there who's joined this afternoon, just to ask, what are the common signs and symptoms? So, Jeanette,
that they're seeing presenting,
yeah. So if we jump to that next slide, I suppose, and talk about the community workers in the same context as well. Hopefully everyone can have a think just about maybe other ways that they've identified people or seen gambling harm present in different ways in their service or their practice.
Great. Okay, no worries. Oh, this slide is actually very similar to the last. So can we move to the next one along? Nick, would that be okay?
Sure.
Lovely. Cool. And so then we're moving on to assessment and treatment. And so gambling counsellors use, depending on which service you refer to, use a variety of different approaches with their clients. And for example, something might include a behavioural approach. And these kind of things are the practical things. So they could include like setting up a self-exclusion, which a counsellor can do with them. They don't have to go to the venue. They can actually do it with the counsellor. Or assisting the client to work out what practical measures they could implement to reduce triggers, including reducing their access to cash, driving home in a different route, recording their gambling and non-gambling days. And these measures are kind of that band-aid solution. So that's kind of the things you kind of might do initially with somebody to say, okay, let's help you kind of put a stop on it while we're getting the real change from therapy around changing the way you think. And that's where the cognitive approaches come in, and what we use those for is to identify and address any erroneous beliefs that the client holds about gambling. For example, the belief about how the machine's working in cycles and taking and returning money. We kind of change their beliefs or thoughts around that. Or another erroneous belief could be that the machines are keeping track of the money that go in and out of them. Or a lot of people think, someone has to win, it could be me. And so we kind of deconstruct all of those. And then motivational enhancement therapy might be used when a client's ambivalent about wanting to change their gambling. So we look at those kind of forms, different forms as long, and obviously as well for counsellors, it can be difficult to say, let's only look at one aspect of the gambler's life, the gambling. As counsellors, we want to look at the whole big picture of the person, and counsellors are trained to be able to provide counselling specifically to affect the gambling directly, and also to provide counselling to the periphery issues. So not just for what keeps them gambling with more time and money, but what gets them to the gambling venue, which could be the stress or anxiety or wanting to escape. It could be an array of things. So we can actually add supports in for that. And I guess again, it's just looking for the things that the signs or symptoms that are coming out, and being able to take any opportunity to link up the patient or the client with a gambling service. And being sort of connecting with a client around that. So something like, it doesn't have to be like this. There are many free and confidential services that have helped many people who are being harmed by gambling, and I can help you make contact with one of those if you wish. So just kind of bringing that conversation or planting that seed. All right. So that brings us to, I think, the next.
It does. I might just pause here just for any questions that anyone may have, or any particular examples. I mean, have you seen people present with the sorts of things that we went through clinical indications, for example, or are there people who you've picked up on through conversations already? I mean, obviously, we're going to start talking to the co-design process in a second, and talking how we develop the screening tool. But it'd be great to hear if you have had any experience so far just with questioning within your services or within your practices. So I might just pause there for a minute or so, and then we'll continue on.
Hi, it's Pete France here from Rindu House.
Hi, Peter.
Campbelltown. Look, I think we see these people on a very regular basis. But one thing I do notice is that, especially if they're mandated, when they're mandated, they basically tell you to get out of their business because they're mandated to be there around a specific topic. Mm-hmm. And it's basically, I'm only here to discuss that because I'm made to. So you get out of my life. I've got enough people interfering. I don't need another one. So, and I think, unfortunately, that's my perception is that they don't see the gambling as being harmful. Mm. It's my money, I earn it. How I spend it is my business. It's out of my business.
Mm. Yeah, and I feel like that in that cycle of change, there are these people that we're going to run across where we see them as being pre-contemplation, and the goal with them to me is not to actually aim to get them to action, but to just again move them towards contemplation, like planting that seed of if they're ready to talk they can, and if they're asking you not to review it, that's fine. At least they know in the future there is an avenue for that. And I think it's great to hear that you kind of are delving into that with them even at their pre-contemplation stage.
What I suggest to the workers is that record it, and if they get, like, we've got 3 stages. We've got the third stage is sort of when they've completed the main bulk of the program, and they're looking at relapse prevention. And I think when they get to that stage, if they hang in there that long, they're more open to look at other aspects of their life.
Nice.
And it's something you can actually revisit there when you raise the topic of whole of life wellness, not gambling, not addiction, but just whole of life wellness.
Yeah.
And because I think we find that they're a little bit more receptive at that point. The blinds have opened a little bit, and they're prepared to take a peek anyway.
Yeah. What a nice a nice understanding you're showing of the change cycle and knowing the right time to have that conversation.
Nick, it's Kate. Can I ask a question?
Of course you can. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks. This has come up with people we work with. I'm from the Alliance for Gambling Reform. I'm just sitting in on this because we're on the advisory committee for this project. But we work with a number of people who are impacted by gambling, and for some of them it's a family member who gambles, and so they themselves are impacted. And so I think I'd like to make 2 observations. One is that a lot of the discussion, including this, is predicated on thinking that we're talking to the person who is gambling, and therefore they, statements like, they don't think gambling is a problem for them, is not the same kind of approach. I know we're getting onto that later, Nick, but the same kind of approach that someone who's being harmed because of somebody else's actions. But also talking to, say, I was just talking recently to a mother of someone who has struggled for a very long time with his gambling, and well-meaning people have suggested that gambling counselling could be helpful for him. And she dismisses it, and so does he, because they tried it once and it didn't work. And I think that can often be a response too from people when it's brought up that, you can get help for this, there are counsellors. And they may well have tried it and it didn't work because they weren't ready, or they just didn't hit it off with the counsellor. And it's a pretty intense thing to do. And if you don't have that trust, it's not going to work. And so I guess that's something that would be good to know, how to tactfully suggest that maybe they should just try again. Thanks. Thanks.
And thanks, Kate. I think one thing that comes to mind about inviting them to try again is hopefully something that this program will help with, this project will help with, is knowing who the gambling counsellors are yourself. So you're actually referring on to somebody, I think that can be helpful in trying to say, well, I've met such and such, and you'll have a bit of a sense which counsellor hopefully might fit with which service at least might fit with a particular individual. And, I guess the other thing is you guys are supporting these people and they're building relationships with you. And if they're having good relationships with you, it's a good platform too, isn't it? To be able to say, well, how did you think you were going to go when you came to see me? And now we've got this relationship. Perhaps that could be a different kind of relationship you have with a counsellor, a different counsellor, or at this point in time. I don't know. Does that make sense?
I think it's a really interesting challenge, though, isn't it? Not just in the context of gambling, but in any mental health service, because we know the failure rates of sometimes that first consultation, and I think it's probably a challenge that the entire industry has to look at as, okay, well, how do we ensure that we're picking those people back up and putting them and allowing them or showing them that there are other opportunities available. And just because it didn't work the first time, it's a bit like a dating service almost, isn't it? Someone actually joked with me at a psychology conference that I went to once that perhaps there needs to be an algorithm like we use on Tinder and dating apps to find the right psychologist or the right counsellor for the right person. Strange idea, strange concept, but maybe that's something that the industry might eventually move towards, and we actually start getting better at understanding, okay, what do people value, what do people require out of counselling or psychology services, and then how do we best support them? This is obviously a very simple step in just kind of identifying harm, and you're right, Kate. It's obviously not just about the individual; it's about the actual person gambling. It's about, we know the 6 to 10 affected others that come with a person that's experiencing gambling harm. So I think lots of debate and discussion about how we kind of, I guess, recapture people if they do fall out of the support that we're hoping to obviously refer people down.
Nick, John here. Hello, and hi, Janine. Thanks for having me. Hi. I have a question. I work with the core community services, and we work in the settlement space. We provide resettlement services to newly arrived refugees and migrants for the past few years, at least, mainly from Middle East. Now, my question is in regard to how do you go about identifying, or at least distinguish between the normal, or actually I should say, gambling-related stresses or stresses to those that might be related to refugee migration and the trauma related to that? How do you, because often we do assume that majority of refugees coming from war-torn zones would have experienced the traumatic related experiences. So how do you differentiate those experiences with a potential gambling related experiences? Thank you.
That I think that's a good question, and I think that's where the screening tool, if it's part of course, that you're going to actually flag a gambling problem if they're ready to identify with it, I suppose. Because you're right, when we looked at all those signs and symptoms before, those signs and symptoms can relate to lots of things, like lack of sleep is related to trauma and stress is related to trauma. And you're right. And I think it's just investigating it with the client. And again, there's no harm to me to ask somebody, have you ever, that first question, which we'll get to, you know, have you ever been affected by gambling in any way, and give them the opportunity. It's not about being a huge detective about this. It's about letting them know that this is a safe space to talk about gambling if you wish to do so by mentioning it.
I think it's a really good segue to kind of talk about the co-design process that was undertaken end of last year when we kind of started this project off. And one of the decisions that was made pretty early on, not to jump ahead too much, was to basically screen everybody. And I think that's probably a very easy way of getting around that sort of issue that you're talking about is, well, if we're asking everybody, it's that non-judgmental, it's removing the stigma from it. And also, you know, you're not having to try and guess who might be affected by gambling harm, either individually or as an affected other as well. You've kind of got these questions that you can go through someone with to inform your conversation from there. So we might just jump forward now to that co-design model, which hopefully everyone can see my screen still. Basically, what as I've just mentioned, what we are going to be doing is, or asking you to do in your services, is to screen everybody over the age of 18 to identify, as I said, individuals who are experiencing gambling harm and, of course, affected others as well. And that's, I think I may have mentioned as well the statistic, but they do estimate that 5 to 10 additional people are negatively affected by a person's gambling. Now, when we did the co-design process, the majority of the community workers that participated agreed that we should be screening for gambling harm with everybody whenever practical. And I just want to call out, of course, we do have the project has ethics approval. And I just want to call out as well that we do have instances when it's not appropriate to screen. And some of the things that came out of the co-design as well were, okay, if the patient or the client is not physically or mentally well enough, or doesn't essentially have the capacity to consent to being involved in the screening tool, that wouldn't be appropriate. If the patient or client is with another adult, it may not be appropriate as well. Just thinking, pragmatically around if it's an affected other, for example, and their loved one who, they may actually be affected by is with them. It's obviously not appropriate. So we want to try and create that safe space. And of course, we're asking you just to use your professional judgment. If there's a small child present, for example, especially if the child is very verbal or is perhaps a little older and can actually understand a lot of what's being asked. Again, that's a professional judgment because there may be instances where that's fine. And I think we've all seen instances where parents confide in their children and children confide in their parents. So don't want to block it off completely, but just to use some professional judgment there as well. We also, of course, just want to ensure that privacy is maximised. A lot of you, obviously, at the moment will be running via telehealth. Is anybody not running via telehealth at the moment? Just in the comments, if someone could just let us know, I suppose, because it kind of helps us just inform the discussion, because we know that there are going to be a few weeks yet that we will be running like this. So Peter, you just said, yep, Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Great. You're an expert in Teams then, not like Jeanette and I. Is anybody running face-to-face still? I know a few of the GPs who are on maybe. And sorry, Sue's just pointed out you may not necessarily call it telehealth, but things like Skype or Zoom or Teams. And Sue's just identified she's got at least one community using face-to-face. So when we actually go through the screening tool, I'll show you, we have a couple of options. Obviously, COVID has enabled us, and I see it as an opportunity. I think the entire project team sees it as an opportunity to actually move the screening tool to an online format as well. So I might just jump into the screening tool itself, just so you can get a view of it. Don't worry, we will go through these one by one. The questions that we've formulated as part of the gambling harm screen. Just a note as well, we've got copies of these that we will provide to you. So we can print them off as many as you need if you're still doing face-to-face, or even if you're not doing face-to-face and you'd prefer to have a hard copy, we can provide those to you. We've got them in English, we've got them in Arabic, we've got them in Assyrian, and we've got them in Vietnamese. Now, I just would like to call out that we did have some feedback from Carmen on the Assyrian translations this afternoon. We don't think that they're of a high enough standard at the moment, unfortunately. So we're basically going back to the translation team who did that translation for the Assyrian to sort that out. But of course, that will be available in Assyrian as well. We do have as well a decision aid to assist you when we're looking at the tool. And that's all available within the information pack that I sent out a little bit earlier this morning. In terms of the actual preamble to administering the tool, and this might vary depending on how your service runs. So if you do have, for example, reception staff or a practice manager, or anyone who kind of checks in clients and patients, that may still be happening depending on how your service is running, even when we're running online. There might be a phone call before, for example. But we're basically just providing this as a bit of a spiel for you to use just to kind of preempt the screening tool with each of your patients or clients. So I won't read the whole thing there, but basically we're just calling out that everybody's being asked. No one's being directly targeted. It's obviously confidential, and it's obviously, it's basically all about that open, supportive and inquiring conversation, which Janine's going to talk through some of those questioning techniques a bit later in the information session. Without further ado, let's jump into the screening tool itself. So we went for a single item question to start off the screening tool, which is, have you ever gambled? Now that was out of the co-design, the feedback that we received. So that was obviously, again, advocating for universal screening. So kind of starts us off really easily there. If, of course, we get a yes to that question, we go into the, okay, well, thinking about the last 12 months, have you bet more than you could really afford to lose? Have people criticised your betting or told you that you had a gambling problem, regarding of whether or not you thought it was true? Have you felt guilty about the way you gamble or what happens when you gamble? And there's obviously some explanatory notes down the bottom as well. When we've gone through the actual individual, we look at the affected others as part of the same screening tool. So do you think you've ever been affected by someone else's gambling? How would you describe the effect of that person's gambling on you now? And asking the patient or client, what would you like to happen? And that kind of that decision tree that we had before, the decision aid, will actually assist you in the course of action to take there. So we have developed some information packs and talked through in that information pack for you the referral and support options. I think when we were talking even just before, we know there are free and confidential services out there. Most services are available for anyone affected by gambling harm, and that's including, of course, family and friends. And we've, of course, got interpreters and or translation, which are usually available as well. We, of course, as well have a really strong network of multilingual practitioners in the Fairfield area. So I think some advice that we received was, there may not be the need to use an interpreter or a translation service. There might be those options available for people who really could go to multilingual services in the first instance. But of course, there are instances where that might not be appropriate as well. So of course, the option of interpreters is there. So just to talk through a bit more about the support options. So we know we've got Gambling Help, which is obviously funded by the Office of Responsible Gambling. We've got gambling counselling that's available free throughout the community. We've also got financial counselling, again, free available throughout the community. We've obviously got support groups. We've got some online programs. Now, we do have mobile apps. Unfortunately, a lot of those are interstate mobile apps. The Office of Responsible Gambling used to have an app, I was informed, but you'll see a list in the information pack as well of some mobile apps that have been looked at. They're basically, they're pretty basic applications at their core. They're just asking people to track their behaviour, track their spend. It's obviously something that I think needs to be looked at. Mobile apps are an interesting thing at the moment as well, because we know that, for example, Aristocrat, one of the largest EGM companies in the world, have a subsidiary company called Product Madness, which is basically all about creating apps or app versions of their land-based pokies. Incredible that that's allowed. Unfortunately, it does kind of fall between the cracks of the current legislation. So I'm always a bit dubious to, or somewhat scared actually, to talk about mobile apps in the current context when people are obviously not able to visit land-based venues. But there are obviously those good support networks available as well through apps. Referral and support options, so gambling counselling. Janine, I think you've kind of mentioned a lot of this already, but obviously a lot of the counsellors, of course, are going to use a variety of approaches with clients depending on the presentation, on what the perceived need or requirement is, and really all about the priorities of the client and what they want to focus on. And that can take many, many forms, as we've talked about already in our kind of preliminary discussion just before. In terms of what we're actually going to provide as well, so obviously you'll have the screening tool that's being provided in those 3 additional languages. We've got a DL flyer that we will be providing as well. That's also available in Arabic, Assyrian and Vietnamese. We also have a fact sheet that's available, and that will be available again in Arabic, Assyrian and Vietnamese. We've also got that translated into Chinese simplified. We would have loved to have done more languages. Unfortunately, there's just some budgetary restraints on some of those translations that we could have done. But what we're hoping is that regardless of the answers that someone receives, they'll actually be receiving or offered this collateral as part of the conversation or part of the project. So again, we'll provide those. Bit hard to provide a DL flyer when you're doing things over the net, but once we all start, hopefully in not too distant future, being able to do face-to-face appointments and consultations, we can start providing those resources in hard copy. Janine, I might hand this over to you.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks, Nick. Do you mind, Nick, just scrolling back to the screening tool? So the individual problem gaming. So the next one, yeah, that one.
Sure.
Thanks for that.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make some further comment around this, I guess, in terms of what kind of things what kind of responses or things that might come up with clients. If they're looking at question 1, for example, have you bet more than you could, or any of these questions, first of all, if anyone answers anything on any of those other than never, then that's kind of raising a flag for us. There's no kind of score that someone has to get higher than. It's if if they indicate never, then that's done, but anything else is worth a conversation. And things, I guess, is to open that conversation, because they'll maybe do this before they come in or they're with you. And then you've got, have you bet more than you could? So if they've ticked something, sometimes, most of the time, or almost always, I guess it's like we do with anything, just opening that up a little bit to, can you tell me a little bit about, give me an example of kind of what's been happening for you there, and the kind of things to expect, I would think would be things like, you know, I set a limit and then I find myself going back to the ATM for more money, or I borrow money to gamble with, or I can't meet bill payments, or I chase losses. So I've lost and then I'm going to keep chasing them either that day or the next day. And same if there's something that is indicated around being criticised by someone, investigating, you know, what are the things other people are kind of thinking around your gambling, opening it up, or have you ever felt guilty? Same thing. So tell me about what happens there, and people probably might say things like, I don't want to go home after gambling and face my family, or I hide it from my family. They might have thoughts that their family would be better off without them, or I'm stupid, what's wrong with me, why do I keep doing that? That kind of thought pattern is not uncommon, I guess, for people who are harmed by gambling. And response from there, I guess, is again our usual thing. So it's connect and then redirect. So how can we connect with the client about this? So maybe something like, it must be really, really tough to find yourself in this situation. You know, gambling can affect finances, relationships, emotions, and so much more. And open that space for them to talk about it. And then the redirection comes from, you know, there are free and confidential services that I can connect you with. So just that little bit of thinking around what people might be saying if they come in with these questions. Hopefully that's kind of a helpful bit of insight. And Nick, would you go on to the next slide with these questions as well? And this is, again, where, like Kate was saying, like, this isn't just about the person with the gambling issue. We're also wanting to support and help, and the services, the free gambling services, are there to support people that are affected by someone else's gambling as well. And so just getting information around that is really important. And actually, if we look at the research on this questionnaire, which is limited, but it does indicate that even people who don't know for sure on that first question are often just as depressed as those disclosing past or present gambling harm effects. And anyone who responds with a positive screen is significantly more likely to be depressed than those who say no, never. And so we can see again that the harm is not just to the person who is gambling, but also to those people around them. And the other thing, I guess, if we're looking at question 2, that this kind of question is helping the person in front of you to actually reflect on their own needs. And that's often not the case with family members. I guess when I see a family member who often comes into my my therapy room for support, they've come in completely with a focus on the other person. How do I help them? How do I get them so they're ready to come and see you? What's going to happen and what do I need to do? And that's part of how we support them. And it is only part of it. The other part of what we do is how can we give you strategies so that you can manage in this time as well, because things are hard, and we give them psychoeducation about the gambling process and that kind of thing as well. Yeah, and the other thing that we talk about about this screen is that you notice it does avoid the term counselling when we're talking to family members, because often they don't see themselves as needing the counselling. So we're referring it more as support and that kind of thing around that. So I just wanted to kind of clarify those few things. Nick, would you mind skipping forward now to the gambling harm is identified? So I guess after those screens are completed, and if you find that a gambling harm is identified, it's kind of then what do we do next? And of course, the first thing you would know is assess whether there is any immediate safety concerns in line with your organisation. And the next thing is responding supportively and with empathy. Obviously, when we do that, it helps the client feel safe. Help them feel safe if they are ready to address the issue, and it also provides them with the knowledge of, if they're not ready now but they become ready in the future, they've already got then in their mind where they can go for support if they ever do become ready. And I think that's really an important part. It's not about getting everyone to be ready today. It's about opening up the possibility that if you are ready, if it happens, here I am, in a non-judgmental way, because obviously we want to normalise this. This is a public health issue, and it happens for some people. But we also want to allow the control to stay with the client about the decisions that are made. And yeah, I like they've put here some nice kind of ways that you can start that conversation. And again, maybe when we get to the next section, people might bring up ways that they've opened the conversation, because I'm sure there's many ways that we can do that. Okay, could you flick to the next slide, please, Nick? Thank you. Okay, and then again, what Nick was mentioning, if no harm is identified, then obviously just thanking the client for answering the questions. And again, I'm just going to reiterate that opens that door. So it's saying thank you, but now you've actually laid a pathway for them, or if someone else comes into their mind down the track, they know where to get the help. But please, even if no harm is identified, offer them the flyer, and briefly anyway. So here's some information we're giving to everyone. The more information that gets out there, the more normalised it is, the more coffee tables it's sitting on, the better, really. And then keep the door open. So I want to let you know that it's a safe space and you can speak freely about your or your family's gambling behaviour in the future. So just again, it's not just asking the question and ticking the box. It's actually going that extra step with those extra few sentences. It's like letting them know this is I'm here to support this issue as well. All right, thank you, Nick. Starting the conversation. Okay. Okay, so encouraging disclosure. Did we want to stop for comments here or just keep going? How are we going for time? And
I think it's probably a natural place to stop for any questions anyone has around the screening tool itself. Does anyone have any specific questions about, well, I guess the screening tool or what we're going to be actually providing to each service? We may have covered it expertly, Janine. Not too many questions.
Perhaps. Good. All right. Thanks. Shall I keep going? Keep going through?
And I think this is the really practical stuff, right, which Janine's now going to take us through. I think starting that conversation, how to actually have that conversation, I think it's a really practical segment. So I'll hand back over to you, Janine. Sorry.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Sorry. Oops. Oh, hang on. Sorry, everyone. I'm just looking at my screen. It's a bit different. All right, so we've got here engaging and disclosure. So already building on the rapport that you've built with the client and letting them know it's a safe place to talk about issues that everyone has different opinions about, but there is support available. Remind about confidentiality. And yeah, I think that normalization, so, gambling harm is a health issue. It's not just about the gambling that's going to impact, it's the bigger the bigger picture of yourself and your health. So I guess my question comes back to you guys here, because I kind of start to relate it back to how we started talking and screening more readily for mental health over the years we have, and for drugs and alcohol, and even more recently now, we're as a community we're far better at screening for domestic violence as well. And I think this kind of fits in as a health issue. And what kind of strategies do people use around getting people to talk about those issues that might translate or transfer over?
John here again from CORE. The communities that we work with or assist, refugee and migrants, usually they come to us via referral from a SSI or Settlement Service International.
Yeah.
And so when they come to us, we do sit down with the family members or as a family and talk about a range of holistic assessment, looking into the individual health. We do cover both physical and mental health, and we look into other holistic part of their lives, including employment, education, social life, as well as housing. So that's how we go about, having or starting the conversation with the families. But as I said again earlier, that we're not gambling or health specific service. So we don't at this stage go in any details around gambling itself.
Yeah. It sounds like you're asking a lot of those personal questions and that kind of thing. And would it feel like much of a jump to add in some questions around gambling, around the gambling questions we popped up with that?
Yeah, no, I don't think it would be an issue. I guess the issue is being able to actually or having an understanding of those particular questions to screen, and having the ability to then be able to say, right, these are the information that I've identified in relation to gambling, and so what do I do with it? How do I refer you further? Yes. I think, let me say that our current staff are not particularly trained to be able to ask those particular questions. Remember that in some communities, including communities of those that we work with, questions around the gambling, similar to mental health, are somehow seen as a taboo. And so going into those conversations might seem a bit intrusive. However, having knowledge around how do you actually ask those questions in a safe and inviting environment is probably what we needed to look at. How do we upskill majority of those staff members, the frontline staff members, to be able to ask those questions alongside the other questions that we do ask normally?
Yeah. Okay. And so with the brief stuff I was touching on, is that helpful towards that, or is there kind of more that you need in terms of cultural sensitivity?
No, I think it's mostly what you touched on. I can see on the screen here there are two of my colleagues here, and one of them is a frontliner who actually asked those questions. But we do have more than that, so we do have a number of them. I think it's a question of training them, basically providing this information to them, and go through a little bit of upskilling to them to be able to build that confidence of themselves.
Yeah, and it is about confidence, isn't it? I feel that's the same when we were, when before asking this domestic violence screening questions, I feel like people had a really low confidence. Health workers had not everyone, but some people had a low confidence towards asking that, and it's with kind of time and practice and getting some other people, like talking with other people about how they do it, that brings the confidence, isn't it? And that's how we get rid of taboos as well, I think, or at least minimize them, help take some of the shame out of it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think I just want to call out a quite an important comment from Peter saying, I don't think you can script cultural skills, which I think's quite a contextually relevant comment there. It is a very difficult, nuanced area. We will obviously talk to that a bit more in the information session a bit later on around some of those sensitivities. But realistically, yeah, we can't script it as much as sometimes I think we'd like to.
Yeah. Good. Beautiful. All right. Lovely. Good. And so were there any other comments around the strategies people use to get that information in other areas like drug and alcohol or mental health, or are we ready to move on? I think.
It's Kate.
Hi, Kate.
Just like to say, I discuss gambling harm not in a clinical setting and not with people who are possibly distressed or already upset who have come to seek help. So it's a different context, and I appreciate that if it's a GP clinic or with a community worker, there are already issues going on that might make that a bit more tricky. But I have found over the last couple of years that I've been doing this job that simply being non-judgmental and talking about how this is a huge problem that more people are impacted on than is commonly spoken about, and making it very clear that it's neutral often gives people sort of the permission to disclose, though that is usually the people who are impacted by somebody else's gambling. It's rare that someone will disclose that they themselves have the problem, but at least since we know that there's so many more people impacted by someone else's gambling, in a way, we should expect in a pilot story like this that's actually they're the people that most people will be talking to. But I think as soon as they feel, my experience has been, if people feel that the person is not judging them, that makes a big difference straight away, and it's fairly easy to establish that. Even in people from a cultural group where it's supposed to be taboo, because let me tell you, even in my cultural group, as it were, white middle class Australia, it's a taboo anyway. People don't like to admit that there's a problem and it relates to gambling. They're more likely to disclose that they have mental health issues these days than that there's an issue to do with gambling, either of their own or in their family. But this is not something, I think, that's a shameful topic just for coloured communities. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kate. I think it is taboo. in all communities just about. And what I hear from what you were saying, which was really helpful, is coming along as a non-judgmentally, which is part of that is being able to ask the question without feeling your own nervousness or shame or around it. But what really hit me in the words you were using, Kate, is that it's in addition to non-judgmental, it's validation. So validation of the client's experience in a neutral way. And I think, yeah, you're right, that's powerful with any of these, isn't it? With gambling, drug and alcohol, domestic violence. So yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kate. Okay, were there any other comments there?
Just another comment from Peter, actually. Just saying a comment. I feel relationship building is critical when discussing this condition that can successfully fly under the radar for a long time. I think that kind of follows on quite nicely to what we were discussing, and I guess the approach that we're advocating for here as well.
Lovely. Great. Shall we move on the next slide, which is just around motivational interviewing. So I guess again the thing is the slide says clients may be relieved when you bring up gambling in a professional and non-judgmental manner, and you're able to express empathy and really importantly focus on the problem, not the person. So that externalizing of it. And, you know, I think part of that non-judgmentally is potentially thinking about motivational interviewing terms. We could even look at just a pros and cons investigation of it, you know. So does your gambling have any effect on any other area of your life? Could be a way to kind of get them to think about some cons, or, you know, open that side of it. And also the understanding that there are also some positives to gambling, and what are those for you? Like it makes sense that there's positives too, and that understanding of this is a whole, and that's the struggle for people, that it's not all negative, that they have things that they feel that it helps them out with, and being able to connect with them over that or around that. My experience, people perhaps might say it helps me to switch off from stress or escape from an argument, and something we can do from that. I guess again, if they're bringing that, then we can draw their attention to seeing the stress of gambling leading to reduced sleep, in the example that's on the page there. That, you know, like gambling could be used to reduce stress for the short term, but in the long term it's increasing stress, which is leading to reduced sleep, which then increases stress, which leads to more gambling. So it's just kind of maybe even helping them see that picture, that big picture a bit. Okay, cool. Yeah, and then looking, we go to the next slide, please, Nick? Thank you. And this is the readiness to change information. And again, the thing I always focus on when I'm thinking around this readiness to change circle is that people, and if we're talking, particularly if we're talking to affected family members, their goal often for the person with a gambling issue is wanting to get to action. I want this person to get straight into action, and I think that's our goal. Can often get like, oh, if they're doing something, then I feel like we're making progress. But again, someone who's not considered this to be an issue at all, to start thinking about it even slightly, that is a step in the direction towards action. And so just remembering that we're taking people around this circle at a slow pace, and people go from pre-contemplation to contemplation to back to pre-contemplation. But just being aware, where are they at the moment, and how are the words that I'm using going to convince them not, and I don't know, I guess I always find that if people are coming in, say family members, for me, that's my experience in the therapy room, is with family members, and they're saying, I just want them to stop, but the person doesn't think they have a problem, then there's so much resistance. And so part of the work I do with them is saying, well, how do we, rather than getting them to change and take action, how do you get them to think about the possibility of change? Yeah. Some of you may be thinking, sorry. I'm just seeing, they're asking me, say, some of you may be thinking about conducting screenings. Oh yeah, okay, cool. So I think everyone's probably over this, like, is in really knowledgeable about this readiness to change framework. And now I want to talk specifically just a little bit about the COLD community. So would you mind flicking the slide, Nick? Thank you. So COLD people who gamble may be more likely to develop problems than individuals from general population due to different beliefs about luck and chance. So that's something that kind of the researchers showed, that if starting to gambling, there may be some of those luck and chance thinking patterns that can impact. Stigma and shame we've talked about can get in the way of help seeking. So again, just normalizing it by talking it through. The concepts of counselling to other therapies are not well understood. Of counselling or other therapies are not well understood. So maybe even being culturally aware of someone's background. Would it be difficult to go to gambling counselling, or would it just be difficult to go to any kind of generalist counselling, because that might be something they've never really had in their cultural experience prior. And of course, having the support and information in different languages. So the project has worked to get as many languages as they can access to this. And there are, and I don't know if we've mentioned, but there is a gambling service that is has counsellors that can speak different languages, a variety of different languages as well. And I guess I just want to share a little story about a client of mine who came from a COLD background and had lost a lot as a result of gambling and made changes, and had kind of and has achieved abstinence for quite some time. And his background was COLD background, and he felt like, because our services are all free, he felt because of the impact that the services have had for him, he wanted to contribute something back. And he was really passionate about that. Like, what I want to feel like I can give back so that more people can get the help that I wanted to get sooner than I did. And what actually, and at that point he was like, and how do I do that confidential? Because I don't want anyone to, there was still that shame around it, given his cultural thinking, I guess, that I want to help and I don't want to be judged. And even at that stage, he was feeling really torn. Okay, I might hand over to you, Nick.
Thank you. Sorry, I just had to put some lighting on in my house since we went so dark. Just, I guess, building on the story, Janine, that you've just shared. A lot of the feedback, of course, that we received throughout the co-design was around COLD communities, and of course, the way in different cultures that gambling is viewed. Particularly in Arabic communities, of course, what we're starting with in the on this slide here, obviously considered a source of entertainment and refuge, but also of shame, a source of quick money. And considering religion as well, a huge factor, of course, with Arabic communities is that gambling is forbidden in Islam, which makes it more difficult to obviously disclose and have a conversation and admit harm related to gambling. And I think that's, again, where that non-judgmental conversation style really comes in. We also actually discover as well through the research and through lots of the stories that were told throughout the co-design process, that there actually is a bit of a concern that if people do talk about, gambling or harm associated with gambling, that government services or financial support that they rely on may be cut off, or may be passed on and shared with other agencies. And I think that's really important as well, just to kind of stress the importance of it's an open communication, and of course there's a level of confidentiality that's shared, and also I think that probably relates as well just to a broader understanding and the broader education requirements that a lot of communities just need around how the health system works and how these sorts of issues are managed within our health system. And how we actually communicate that with our clients and our patients is really, really important. Moving to the Assyrian communities, we did identify some cultural sensitivities that were quite common, that they had, in common with the Arabic community. We know that obviously community leaders and church leaders, look, that's probably true of every community that we see, especially around Fairfield, that community leaders and church leaders do have a very strong influence. We know that doctors and other medical professions obviously have a strong influence as well. And I think what we found was that, again, across most communities, that it's considered a game or social activity in the case of the Assyrian community. Moving to the Vietnamese community, some of the feedback that we received again was that many of the Vietnamese population in Fairfield were refugees, low level of education. I think, John, was it you from CORE? You were obviously talking about the refugees that you work with.
Yes.
Thank you. And we found a lot of similar stories coming through from the Vietnamese communities as well. They've fled or escaped war. They've got obviously comorbidities potentially associated with that, such as PTSD, etc. And they may not see, gambling as an issue if it's not life or death even. And that actually came up quite strongly in the co-design. So it really is, I think, just all these strategies that we've talked about. Again, just being non-judgmental, and I think probably doing the screening tool in this way really lends itself to that, because we are asking everybody. It's a nice way to start that conversation off. One thing that we did pick up, just to make a comment on as well, is that counselling is not really a concept that exists particularly strongly in Vietnamese culture. There is a perception that severe and persistent psychological concerns, that's when you go to counselling. So again, I guess you guys would know best when you're dealing with these sorts of issues within your services, and I guess how you counteract that. Again, we're just asking you to use your professional opinion and your extensive experience in that area. As I mentioned, unfortunately, there's only the fact sheet that's being translated into simplified Chinese, so not traditional Chinese at this stage. But this was some feedback that we received from, or directly from, a gambling counsellor who works closely with Chinese clients. So again, really useful feedback to bear in mind. Obviously, we've got that the refugee migration in the 70s with Chinese communities. Obviously ingrained in Chinese culture, obviously a somewhat ambiguous attitude towards gambling within that community as well. Not really a problem if you win. I think it's all these things, Janine, that you were kind of talking to, right? There's a lot of instances that we've obviously heard about, and I'm sure you've experienced within counselling and psychology, that you've almost got to break down some of these attitudes and some of these perceptions that people have towards gambling. And that again is influenced by that readiness to change circle or cycle that we were looking at. And I think, Peter, you're on fire with the comments, but I think you said it quite succinctly again. It's the problem is the problem, not the person. And I think if it's quite a simplistic way of putting it, but I think if we look at these sorts of conversations within that context, I think that's where we go a really long way into having a meaningful conversation and a meaningful referral pathway and a meaningful support pathway for anyone who's affected by someone experiencing gambling harm. So moving to the implementation phase is our next kind of phase of the information session this afternoon, moving into the evening now. Did anyone have any questions around these cultural sensitivities that we were talking to, or indeed some personal stories that anyone would like to share? We'd love to hear them.
Nick, good afternoon, John here again. And thanks for the slides where you were talking about cultural sensitivity on gambling. Now, pretty much everyone is aware of issues when it comes to call the communities around their perception and understanding of counseling. Now, I guess the question I have, which might be a comment also, is that within those cultures, including my own, where I come from, and also many cultures across within African communities, is that we tend to seek support informally. We tend to approach informal networks within families or within the communities, within respected elders within the community. And therefore, formal counseling, as we know, professional counselors, are not really regarded highly simply because of the fact that it's not a thing within those cultures. Now, the question was whether there is a probability or a possibility of somehow formalizing those informal support services, whether those informal networks within communities. There are usually a number of individuals known within the community as the go-to person or the go-to people. Are there possibilities of those people being supported, upskilled, so that they can actually continue providing the informal support within a semi-professional way? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Janine, probably a little bit better place to talk to that than I am. I think you're on mute, Janine. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, it's a good. I see kind of where you're coming from, and I know that that's kind of where. I'm sorry. I'm just collecting my ideas around it. I know, like, we've done some training at the gambling clinic regarding Aboriginal culture, and we have at times like invited exactly what you're saying, those community elders or well-placed community people, and given them some of that information. So I think there's a bit of room for it. I also feel like strengthening that bridge as well, like finding out who those community elders are, or who those support people are in the community, and developing a relationship with that person directly with a gambling counsellor. I wonder if that kind of creating that bridge could be a way to do it as well. So it kind of two people working together, the informal and the formal structure. I don't know what that would look like. And something, I guess, to put back to the funding body as an idea. But I know I have myself, again, worked with communities in that way, in that it's been a community, respected person in the community who knows the work that we're doing really well, has kind of really come through and understood the whole program, and then felt really confident because they know us as the counsellors and the program that's going to be delivered. they feel really comfortable referring people to us, and people take that on. How does would something like that kind of work in line with what you're thinking there, John?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, look, we tend to rely heavily on those influential individuals or figures, and
yes,
all types of community engagement do require assistance from those people, and we rely heavily on them. And for example, some of the activities that we do run on a daily or weekly basis are so effective because of those particular individuals, and so having them on board in some form or the other is or could be somehow a game changer for some individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I found it given that experience of doing that. So it's definitely open and available. And I guess it's just about knowing who those people are and being able to build that bridge, I think.
And I think, as you said, Janine, obviously this being a pilot, we do have all sorts of opportunities to kind of gather that feedback, John. And not just obviously, John, I guess your commentary around this, but once we actually hopefully implement the tool, we will start to find, more commentary like this around how we could perhaps better engage, upskill certain community members, etc. And there's probably inevitably is going to be more that comes out of, I guess, some of the feedback that we're hoping to gain from each one of you as we run through the implementation of the screening tool. So I think it being a pilot project, really exciting because we can obviously point all these things out to our funding body, which is, as we know, is the Office of Responsible Gambling, and look to, okay, well, if we're going to roll this out, for example, statewide, which is something that they are looking at, is to how to scale a screening tool like this across the state and into other areas, of course, initially. But these are all sorts of considerations that they'd love for us to find out. So thank you, John, for sharing that. And I just want to obviously encourage everybody throughout the process, if there's anything that that comes up for you or thinks, you think could have been done better or could be done better, to engage community leaders or the community or just the patients or clients of your services, we're all ears. And obviously it's the beauty of utilising you guys as professionals on the ground.
Sorry, my name is Murshid Amr. I'm from Core Community Services. My colleague, my team leader, John, have been mentioning a lot of things. And just I'd like to add something. Regarding to develop the gambling way from the clubs and the market and the street, and every time they have developing the way to get the customer to them. So in our situation, I have been working with the Core Community Services like more than almost like 10 years. I'm attending the sessions and the information session, and our way to working with the gambling and alcoholic, it's same design, never develop. So we are develop all times. We are standing with the sessions, with the counselor, and what else? Because these people, they use like very thing. For example, they give him like a money to make a gambling. They give him like tea, coffee, and they coming to them. And our scientific, so we have to clarify scientific things to the client. For example, I'm background like with the scientific. So if it's the machine gambling working for like design to thief you, to give you like one or 0 million to get chance to receive, to win the money. So nothing go through that one. If he said our chancing in this millions, you get return your money and you win the one, and then we lose it, is nothing coming down in this way. So all times we dealing with the who's go to the gambling, we starting at the gambling. I have been working with the refugee new arrivals And a lot of sessions, a lot of the people facing that one, starting gradually to lose the money. And as you mentioned with the alcoholic, and it is all times like easy for them to go to the club, spend the money, and facing the a lot of financial issues with the families and with the children and every single like person in the families. So we need like really developing our this is arguing between the clubs who is designed to bring the customer or to bring the client to them, and we are in same level. So what's your plan for the next to develop this way? Thank you very much.
Sure. So it sounds like you're kind of having conversations already around gambling, which is great. and I feel like you're kind of saying, you know, and I'm giving them some of the information I know and bringing the science into it. And that's really what our service is about. It's about bringing the science into it and really the crux of, I guess, the programs or the gambling programs is to really like hone in and be able to give those challenges to the client in a way, and I guess like, and I hear where you're coming from too, like you've got the person in front of you, they're already engaged, you want to be able to give them more information, and I'm going to take that on board and feed it back to the project as well, because it sounds like you're saying, as well as John's saying, like it would be nice if we had a bit more knowledge to pass on to them before we referred on. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, again, something we can take in, I think, Nick, right, in terms of
absolutely
feeding back to the funding body.
Absolutely. Thank you for that commentary, because I think identifies what we actually talked about before, which is obviously building that rapport with someone. And Janine, you've kind of summed it up perfectly. We've got the person that you've built that relationship with now with you in front of you. They trust you, and to be able to offer them the support and the guidance of where to go next is obviously one thing. But actually be able to, I guess, maybe start preempting some of the conversations. I mean, that's obviously where the gambling specific support services come in, because of course they are specially trained in gambling harm, which is a comment that Kate has made on the chat as well. But obviously this project is really just about identifying where gambling harm might be present or an issue for the person, or of course for the affected other. But I think you're right. I think already I can see it clearly in my mind. A natural next step of this is, okay, well, we need to start having more conversations with more services in our communities to upskill and make this more commonplace, as we have over many years with domestic violence, with alcohol dependency issues, with tobacco, for example. Really important point, and I think again these are all things that we can take to the funding body, but also think about an additional project potentially in actually upskilling those in the community around this issue.
And I think it becomes too, Nick, that it's that balance too between what's the role that I'm in as I'm screening, and how much am I screening for, how much can I do, and that becomes the individual kind of community workers' idea too. Are they just have the time to screen and refer on? Do they have the time to go, I can give you like this little snippet of what it's about to, wet your whistle, so to speak, before I refer on? Like, if you want more information like that, these are the places to go for it. So it's kind of getting that balance right for the different individual community workers, I think.
Absolutely.
Hi, Pete here from Randu House.
Hi, Pete.
Hi, Nick. I think the part that usually concerns me is The referring on,
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be, we talk about holistic work, but I think sending an email or a message to someone about a referral, or giving someone a piece of paper saying, go and see this person, I don't find that to be holistic. I think sometimes we've got to be more person-centered, and we've got to, someone needs to take people to places sometimes. Nice. Not always. Nice. Yeah. Some people are very confident and take personal responsibility, but others, the statistics that show about how many times people walk past the treatment centre's door before they actually walk in, I think we need to support people to get through that doorway. And the other thing that comes up is that with referrals, how many times do they have to tell their story? They feel bad enough anyway, and to sort of sit down 2 in a row with people that you don't know and tell your story, that's pretty. I think that's it says volumes for their courage. But I think it's really, if we could act as sort of like that, not mediator, but that just go in there and support them and help them transfer. That
warm transfer, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, that comes back to building those relationships with the gambling counsellors and the community workers, and knowing who you're referring to and saying, hey, I can go along. And again, it comes down to your service. If that's possible, that's great.
But I think there also needs to be consideration from the funders, because I think it's got so sterile now. All they seem to take into consideration with funding is just face-to-face time. The admin's your problem, transfers, that's your problem or someone else's problem. And we've lost that centre of social workers that can actually do that transfer and help people along. And it seems to be that it's just all about face-to-face clinical time. But we're people, and our clients are people. They're not little robots, they're not little machines. And I think the funders need to take into account that we need to sometimes walk down the street with someone or put them in a car and take them somewhere. And that needs to be factored in with the funding, because you can have the best clinicians out and you can have the best screening tools out. But if there's not a good conduit between the screening tool and the counsellor, I think you run the risk of losing the client. So that's just my thoughts.
And yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? Because you're right, we are encouraged to kind of be community and client centered, and keeping that in consideration. And I think that we've all got kind of our own processes to work within, and maybe agitate within as well to get it working more effectively. But yeah, and as a counsellor myself, I always talk to people. If we do like a talks with someone locally, I'm always saying to them, I'm happy for you to come here or for me to go there to meet the client before they come over. I think just creating that space can be helpful at times, and we're able to be.
Yeah, I agree. Even just the way we've been forcibly sent in this direction to use devices now to communicate. You can also set up. You could also set up a Zoom appointment or a Teams appointment and say, hi, Nick, this is Janine. Janine, this is Nick, and he's going to be coming over to see you, and blah, 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 blah. So that there is some form of connection before the person gets there, that when they walk through the door, they know who they're looking for, they know what to expect. So I think we need to work on our referral process, and those soft landings, not sort of bang.
Well, as you said, like even just by virtue of having to repeat your story every time. As you said, it's incredibly brave of someone to do that, but it happens too much. And it's not just when we're talking about mental health issues. I think that's across the board with our healthcare system, right? With any referral to any service. Okay, what's your problem? Didn't you hear from the last person? You know, it's I agree, it's something across the board, but hopefully that's again something that we can signal in our final report as a potential here, because we've got a lot of leeway to talk about these issues in the final report. So I'm looking forward to writing that one with all your feedback.
That sounds promising, because to take it, to just reduce the service to nuts and bolts and face-to-face time, I think can be counterproductive. That's just my opinion.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. All right, we might move to our last section, which is our implementation. So this is actually how we're going to do this thing. So in your resource kits, I just wanted to ask actually everyone, did everyone receive the resource kit that I sent out this morning? Because I got a few did not receive back, and I think it may have been an issue with the file size. So I will resend that. I've compressed it, so I will resend that out after this so everyone's got a view of it. In that resource kit, we've got, among other things, a receptionist workflow and a bit of a, I guess, a checklist of what the receptionist, if you indeed, of course, have one at your service that they can use. Obviously, you saw in the screening tool that we do have that preamble, which can be used as well. That can be used by yourself, whoever's administering the tool, essentially. We've got just a bit of an overview here about obviously what we'd like you to be involved in. So obviously you're all attending the education session this afternoon, and I can't stress enough, thank you so much again for joining us. We know it's a very difficult time for everybody, but fantastic to see so many of you on the call tonight. So thank you again. What we did obviously initially anticipate was using the screening tool in practice, and that was initially scheduled from April to June. Now, what we're hoping is that between hopefully now May and July, we'll have at least 2 weeks or at least 6 weeks. We did say about 2 weeks for GPs and 4 to 6 weeks if we can for any community services to administer the tool. We just would like to get as much feedback from clients and patients as possible about, okay, how prominent is gambling harm in Fairfield? Because looking at the stats, that we showed at the very beginning now, that amount of loss, and I think we all see it, we all see the data, but to actually capture those stories, capture those data of real people is obviously really strong to put in this research project and feed that back to the office. I did mention, of course, that we actually have an online version of the screening tool. I might just quickly break out of the slide, and I'm hoping I don't completely break everything by doing this. But we do have a screening tool that you can access online. Can everybody still see my screen? Or are you just seeing the slides?
The slides.
That's a good thing. Fantastic. So I will do a new share now. Sorry, everybody, bear with me. So a limitation of this is that it won't be in multiple languages, but we did think that that might not be an issue because, of course, you would be the one administering the tool. Just want to reiterate that. So this is not to be filled in by a client or by a patient. This is basically for you to run through someone with in the appointment. And look, this could be a face-to-face. It was obviously designed for our kind of online tools now. So when you've got Zoom running, for example, or Teams as we have tonight. And you just basically run through the questions. So if I go no to the first question, it will actually jump me straight to the affected others portion of the screening tool. And then, of course, if I said no to both questions, it just asks me then for some demographic information, which I'll fill in. The advantage of obviously this being online as well is that those resources that we're providing you with in that info pack, in the resource pack, in the resource kit that I've sent out, you've got them here as links. So if you've got, we'll actually provide you with access to our health pathways, which is a directory which predominantly GPs are using at the moment, but we're opening it up for everybody as part of this project, just to get some clinical information around problem gambling, or gambling harm as it's now called even in our health pathways, which is a win, we think. And of course, those service listings for those gambling specific services in the region. And that's through our online portal called Recovery Point. So once you've had a look at those, and that's of course if gambling harm has been identified and you'd like to talk to the person, while you've got them in the consultation, we then just ask that you tell us what the outcome of the screening was. So did you identify harm? Obviously, in this case, I've said no, so there'd be no risk. And I might just say no action at this time, or as we said, we might just say, well, the information's been provided, because we may have been able to offer them a flyer, or just some general information about, well, this is where to go if you do experience harm or know of anybody experiencing harm associated with gambling. Of course, they can come back to you as well. We also have an option for you to add any further comments here. So that's kind of an online version of the tool. If you're using the paper version, as we've said, that's totally fine if you want to keep using that at home as well. We just ask that you keep them all together, and we'll actually arrange for them to be posted back to us. So we'll provide you with a postage paid envelope, or you can fax them through. Not too sure how many people have fax machines at home these days anymore, but we know some obviously practices are still using fax, keeping the industry alive. But there's all sorts of ways obviously you can get them back to us, but if you can just bundle them together and we'll arrange collection. I'll just go back now to the slides, so sorry, bear with me. So as we've said, keeping track of the screening and referral data, that just means keeping a rec, or keeping the sheet of paper that you filled in. As we said, if it's online, you're submitting the screening tool then and there. I'm just going to go back to the one above. So completing an online feedback questionnaire before and after. Thank you to those who filled in the questionnaire before tonight's information session. There will be a second questionnaire after we do the implementation, just to see how you've gone in terms of implementing the tool and, of course, collecting feedback. We also, of course, have the opportunity to collect your feedback from focus groups and individual interviews as well. A lot of these comments, of course, we've already been or starting to receive already. We want to capture those and really include those in that final report that I keep mentioning, to then feed back to the funding body, being the Office of Responsible Gambling. Just some key contacts for you for the project. So as I mentioned, I'm the project manager with South Western Sydney PHN. We've got Lynn Newen as well, who's our Research and Evaluation Officer. Those are our details. If you have any questions or concerns or ideas, we'd love to hear them. Feel free to get in contact with us anytime. I would just like as well to acknowledge the wonderful Janine. Thank you so much for facilitating this evening.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
We hope everyone got a lot out of it. I mean, I certainly do every time I speak to Janine, so thank you again. Monica, Kate, Eric, Kate, Angela, Jenny, and Lynn as well. All thank you so much for the work to get to this point. It's been a long road, and obviously, as you all know, slightly delayed with COVID, but I think a really important time for us to be screening for gambling. I mean, it's always an important time to screen for gambling, but while pubs and clubs are closed, what's going on out there? We'd love to find that out. And I think it's going to be quite an interesting period now where we can hopefully get some feedback from our clients and our patients, and of course from you guys as being involved in the project. So thank you again. I might just to close us off, just open up the floor for any questions. Feel free if you want to put your video on or just type through the chat. I'm looking at both, so please let us know if there's any questions or where to go from here. Seeing some radio silence, which is good. Hopefully we've covered everything and it makes sense. Well, look at that. We're pretty much bang on 6 o'clock. As I've said, thank you again so much to everybody for joining. Janine, did you have any closing remarks?
No, just thanks for asking me to be part of it. I think it's a really important, obviously as a gambling psychologist, and I've been doing this for 8 years or something now, and one of the things that I really want to be able to do in my role is also support the people, support that pathway or that bridge, and it's been great to kind of be able to facilitate some conversation around building that bridge. So thanks so much.
Brilliant. Everyone, I will be in contact with each of you individually just to set you up with the resources that you require. So I'll be asking you what sort of languages you think you require for some of the information that we are going to provide. You'll see all that, as we said, in the information pack. The Assyrian translations, as I mentioned at the very start of the call, we have identified an issue with them. So they're not quite ready to go yet, but I will let everyone know when those Assyrian resources are up to scratch and available for use. Otherwise, thank you again, and everybody have a fantastic evening. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
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 Bye.